The rain over London was a fine gray mist, the kind that seeped into the black crepe of mourning dresses and chilled the bones of the gathered aristocracy. They stood clustered around a freshly dug grave in a secluded corner of Highgate Cemetery, a tableau of umbrellas and solemn faces, all here to bury Lady Alara Vance. From the shadows of a great yew tree, shrouded in a veil so thick it was like wearing the gloom itself, the deceased watched her own funeral. Alara Vance, née Croft, was not dead. She had painstakingly orchestrated this entire charade. The sudden illness, the doctor's grim prognosis, the final labored breaths witnessed by a hired nurse, all a performance to escape the gilded cage her life had become. For 2 years, she had been the widow of a war hero, General Marcus Vance, a man thrice her age, whom she had married out of familial duty, not love. His death had granted her freedom and a considerable fortune, but it had also made her a glittering target in the marriage market, a prize to be won by any ambitious lord. Faking her death was a desperate act for a desperate woman, the only way to vanish completely and start anew. Her eyes, the color of sea glass, scanned the mourners. They were all there, the vapid dowagers who had dissected her every choice, the eager suitors who had coveted her wealth, the so-called friends who would forget her by the next season. Her gaze lingered on the one man who should have been genuinely grieving, her husband's dearest friend and the executor of her estate, Lord Alistair Finch. Alistair stood at the head of the grave, his broad shoulders straight under his black greatcoat, his hat in his hands. The rain darkened his chestnut hair, and even from this distance, Alara could see the grim set of his jaw. He had been a constant, steady presence in her life since Marcus's passing. He had managed her affairs, shielded her from the worst of the vultures, and had, on a few quiet evenings by the fire, felt like the only real friend she had. Seeing his apparent sorrow, a sharp pang of guilt pierced her carefully constructed resolve. The vicar's droning voice ceased. The coffin was lowered. One by one, mourners stepped forward to toss a handful of damp earth onto the polished mahogany, a final hollow salute. It was then that Alara saw it. As Alistair stepped forward, a woman moved to his side. She was elegant, dressed in impeccable mourning, her face a mask of sympathetic sorrow. She placed a gloved hand on Alistair's arm, a gesture of intimate familiarity. Alistair did not shake it off. Instead, he leaned down as she whispered something in his ear. And then, for the briefest of moments, his grim expression shifted, not into deeper grief, but into something else entirely, a sharp, focused intensity. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent communication that spoke of a long-established understanding, a coldness that had nothing to do with the rain settled in Alara's stomach. That look, that nod, it was not the language of condolence. It was the language of conspiracy. Her mission, the reason she had risked everything to be here today, suddenly curdled in her veins. A fortnight ago, a cryptic message from her past life had found its way to her new secret lodgings. It was from her former handler at the Home Office. Nightingale is activated. Intel suggests a high-level mole, codename Magpie, is operating within your old social circle. Their goal, to dismantle a new European alliance before it is signed. Your cover is perfect. You are a ghost. Find Magpie. She had been a spy during the war, her fluency in 4 languages and her position as a general's wife providing perfect cover for passing messages. She thought she had left it all behind. But the call of duty and the chance to use her skills for one last purpose had been too strong. She had come today to observe, to look for tells among the grieving faces of the ton. She never expected to find a suspect in the one man she had trusted implicitly. The man now receiving a quiet, comforting squeeze from a beautiful widow whose name she couldn't recall. The man who, as her executor, would now have unfettered access to all her personal effects, her diaries, her letters, anything that might hint that Alara Croft was not in that box. As the crowd began to disperse, Alara melted back into the trees, her heart hammering against her ribs. The game had changed. This was no longer a mission. It was personal. Lord Alistair Finch, her steadfast protector, her late husband's most loyal friend, was hiding something, and the woman on his arm was the key. She turned her back on her own grave, a new resolve hardening within her. She would uncover the truth, and if Alistair was the enemy, then she would become the ghost that haunted him. The London townhouse of Lord Alistair Finch was a masterpiece of Georgian elegance, all clean lines and muted grandeur. From her new persona, Elise, a French lady's maid hired through a convoluted series of proxies, Ilara moved through its hushed corridors like a whisper. The interview had been unnervingly smooth. The same elegant widow from the funeral, a Mrs. Isabella Thorne, had conducted it. She was, it turned out, a cousin of Alistair's, and the newly appointed chatelaine of his household, stepping in during this time of grief. Ilara's objective was simple: get close to Alistair's study. Spies were creatures of habit, and if he was Magpie, his secrets would be hidden there, amidst the ledgers and correspondence of a seemingly respectable peer. Her first days as Elise were a study in exquisite torture. She polished silver that reflected the hollows of her own cheeks, the face of a stranger. She arranged flowers in vases she had once chosen herself for a dinner party in this very house. She was a ghost in her own life, invisible to the man she was investigating, and Alistair was a puzzle. He moved through his home with a restless energy, his usual charm replaced by a deep, contemplative silence. He was grieving. But for whom? For her? Or for the complication her death had caused in his treacherous plans? One evening, carrying a stack of freshly pressed linens, she passed his study. The door was ajar. Inside, Alistair stood before the fire, one arm braced against the mantelpiece. He held a small, familiar object, a miniature portrait of Ilara that had once sat on his desk. He wasn't merely looking at it. He was staring into it as if searching for an answer, his thumb stroking the painted surface. The raw, unguarded anguish on his face was so potent it stole the air from Ilara's lungs. It was not the face of a traitor. It was the face of a heartbroken man. For a wild, terrifying moment, she wanted to step inside, to tear off her maid's cap and tell him everything. The impulse was so strong her fingers ached with it. A voice shattered the moment. "Alistair, the figures from the shipyard are troubling." Isabella Thorne glided into the study, her mourning dress replaced by a gown of deep burgundy. She placed a hand on his back, her touch proprietary. Alistair flinched almost imperceptibly and set the miniature down with a definitive click. "Not now, Isabella," he said, his voice rough. "The alliance vote is in a month," she pressed, her voice low but urgent. "Our partners grow anxious. The situation with the Vance widow, fortunate as it was, has left some loose ends that need tying up. They need reassurance." Ilara froze in the hallway, her blood turning to ice. Fortunate as it was, were they talking about her death? Was her fake demise not an inconvenience to his spying, but a calculated part of it? Alistair turned, his expression now a mask of cool detachment. "The only thing that needs tying up is the vote. My personal affairs are not their concern, nor are they yours." The tension between them was palpable, a current of something unspoken that went beyond business. Isabella's smile was sharp. "Everything about you is my concern, Allie. You know that." She left then, leaving Alistair alone. He picked up the miniature again, his shoulders slumping in a wave of what looked like utter exhaustion. The performance was over. The grief, if it was a performance, had been Oscar-worthy. But Isabella's words echoed in Ilara's mind. Loose ends? Was she a loose end? Had someone tried to kill her for real, and she had merely preempted them by faking it? The thought was a vortex of terror. That night, under the cloak of a howling storm, Ilara made her move. With a set of lockpicks hidden in her apron, relics from her past life, she slipped into Alistair's study. The room smelled of him, leather, sandalwood, and faintly of brandy. By the light of a single candle, her hands trembling, not from fear but from a strange sense of violation, she searched his desk. She found nothing. No coded letters, no suspicious ledgers. Just estate management, political correspondence about the very alliance he was supposedly sabotaging, and in a locked drawer, the miniature of her and a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. Her own letters written to him over the years, thanking him for his kindness. He had kept everyone. She was about to give up, convinced she had been horribly mistaken, when her fingers brushed against a false back in the drawer. Her heart stuttered. With a careful push, it slid away. Beneath it lay not a state secret, but a single sealed document. It was a special license, a license to marry, issued to Lord Alistair Finch and Mrs. Isabella Thorne. The date was for a week after her own funeral. The world tilted. The grief, the anguish, it was all a lie. He had been engaged to this woman, planning a new life, even as he stood by Ilara's side pretending to be her friend. Was that the loose end Isabella had referred to? The wealthy widow whose fortune and presence were an obstacle to their marriage? As the candle guttered, casting long, dancing shadows, Ilara realized the terrible truth. She hadn't been hunting a traitor to the crown. She had stumbled into a nest of vipers whose conspiracy was far more personal and far more deadly. And she was standing right in the middle of it. An invitation, thick and cream-colored, arrived at the townhouse. Lord and Lady Havisham were hosting a masquerade, the first large event of the season. For the staff, it meant a frenzy of extra work. For Ilara, it was a perfect storm of opportunity. Isabella Thorne was at the center of the preparations, her voice a constant melodic command. She had chosen a theme of celestial bodies, and the house was filling up with silks meant to mimic the night sky and wire frames for wings. She was to go as the moon goddess Selene. Ilara, assigned to help her dress, felt a cold satisfaction. The goddess of the moon was also a mistress of deception and secret journeys. It was fitting. The night of the ball, the house buzzed with an electric energy. From her small attic room, Ilara could hear the distant swell of the orchestra, the laughter and chatter of London's elite floating up from below. She helped Isabella into a gown of silver-threaded lace, her fingers deftly fastening 100 tiny buttons. Isabella preened before the mirror, a cold, beautiful statue. "The clasp on my diamond necklace is loose, girl," Isabella said, not even looking at her. "Be a dear and fetch the smaller one from my jewel case. The key is on my ring." Ilara's heart gave a hard thump. This was it. The order was given with such casual arrogance, it was as if fate itself had handed her the key. "Of course, madam," she murmured, her voice a perfect imitation of subservience. She slipped from the room, the heavy iron key cold in her palm. The corridor was empty, everyone's attention focused below. Isabella's bedchamber was a sanctuary of tasteful luxury, but it felt sterile, like a stage set. The jewel case sat on her vanity. With trembling fingers, Ilara turned the key. The lid sprang open. Beneath the expected velvet trays of diamonds and pearls, her fingers found what she was looking for: a hidden compartment. Inside lay not jewelry, but a single slim ledger and a packet of letters tied with a black ribbon. The door clicked shut downstairs. The music swelled. She was out of time. Snatching the ledger and letters, she fled to the only place she could think of, the silent, dark library across the hall. She closed the door, locking herself in, and lit a single candle. The ledger was a record of transactions, but the sums were astronomical, and the destinations were banks in neutral countries. The letters, however, were the true damning evidence. They were in code, but it was a cipher Ilara knew well, an old, complex system used by a defeated enemy. And they were signed with a single looping initial, I, Isabella. This was no simple blackmail. This was a full-blown treason operation. Isabella wasn't just manipulating Alistair. She was selling secrets to the highest bidder, using his access and status as her cover. The alliance wasn't just a political inconvenience to her. It was bad for business. Its failure would create instability, and instability was profitable. But why was Alistair going along with it? The special license burned in her memory. Was it love? Fear? She had to know. Creeping back to return the items, her mind raced. She had the evidence to bring Isabella down, but she needed to understand Alistair's role. She needed to see him, to look him in the eye at this very ball, surrounded by the people they both knew. A reckless, dangerous idea took root. In a trunk in her room, buried beneath her maid's uniforms, was the one thing she had kept from her old life: a masquerade gown of deep emerald green, and a mask of black lace and raven's feathers. It was a costume from a lifetime ago, from a ball where Alistair had asked her for a waltz, his hand warm and steady on her back. It was madness. She would be recognized, but she was already a ghost. What was one more apparition? Downstairs, the ball was a whirl of color and sound. Hidden behind her raven mask, Ilara moved through the crowd, her emerald gown making her just another anonymous shimmer in the sea of costumes. And then she saw him. Alistair was dressed as Endymion, the mortal beloved of the moon goddess. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, a glass of champagne in his hand, untouched. He looked not like a conspirator, but like a man serving a life sentence, his eyes scanning the room with a hollow weariness. Isabella was at his side, glittering and cold, her hand possessively on his arm. She was whispering to him, her smile a sharp, practiced thing. Alistair nodded, but his gaze was distant, locked on something, or someone, across the room. He was looking straight at her. Through the crowd, over the heads of laughing nobles, his eyes met hers. There was no recognition, only a strange, arrested intensity. He straightened up, gently disengaging from Isabella. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, he began to move through the crowd, his eyes never leaving her mask. Panic fluttered in Ilara's throat. This was not part of the plan. She turned to melt away, but he was there, before her, his hand extended. "My lady," he said, his voice low and rough. "This dance is mine, I believe." It was not a question. It was a statement, a claim. Before she could refuse, his hand was on her waist, his other clasping hers, and he swept her into the flow of the waltz. They moved as one, a perfect, silent harmony amidst the swirling colors. He held her firmly, guiding her with an innate grace she remembered so well. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the music, to the feel of his hand on her back. "Do I know you?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the music. "I am no one, my lord," she whispered back, deepening her voice, layering a faint French accent over it. "A phantom." "Phantoms do not feel so real," he said, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly. He drew her closer, his breath warm against her ear as he leaned in. "And they do not smell of jasmine," her scent, her favorite scent. He remembered. He spun her, and for a moment the world was a dizzying blur. "I have spent a fortnight mourning a ghost," he whispered, the words raw, meant only for her. "Do not haunt me now unless you mean to stay." The music crescendoed and came to a stop. They stood still amidst the applauding couples, frozen in time. Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. His eyes searched hers, desperate and confused, seeing a ghost he couldn't quite believe in. Across the room, Isabella watched them, her beautiful face a mask of icy fury. The spell broke. Ilara pulled her hand from his, curtsied low, and fled into the crowd, disappearing before he could stop her. She ran, not stopping until she was back in her maid's attire, the emerald gown stuffed back into its trunk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had gone to find a traitor. She had found a man shattered by grief. And she had placed herself directly in the crosshairs of a woman who had just seen her husband-to-be bewitched by a stranger. The game was no longer just dangerous. It was lethal. The townhouse was silent in the aftermath of the ball, a hollow shell echoing with the ghost of music and laughter. Ilara moved through her duties like an automaton, her mind replaying the waltz on a relentless loop. The look in Alistair's eyes, it wasn't the gaze of a guilty man. It was the look of a man drowning. Isabella's mood, however, was volcanic. The slightest imperfection, a speck of dust on a banister, a wrinkle in a curtain, was met with a cold, scalding fury that had the entire staff walking on eggshells. Her eyes, when they fell on Ilara, were like shards of ice. Had she seen through the disguise, or was she simply taking out her rage over the mysterious dancer on the nearest available target? The answer came that afternoon. Ilara was instructed to take a pot of tea to Lord Finch's study. Her hands shook as she arranged the cup and saucer on the tray. This was it. A direct order into the lion's den. She entered the study. Alistair was at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was staring into the cold fireplace, the miniature portrait of her held loosely in his hand. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes, shadowed with exhaustion, flickered over her. There was no recognition, only a vague, polite acknowledgement. "Just there on the table, please," he said, his voice flat. She set the tray down, her back to him, every nerve ending screaming. This was her chance. She could turn around now, reveal herself. But the words stuck in her throat, choked by fear and a devastating, unexpected hope. "A strange thing happened at the ball last night," he said. Almost to himself, Ilara froze. "I met a ghost," he continued, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. "Or perhaps I am simply going mad," she turned slowly. He was looking at the miniature, not at her. "My lord?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter," he sighed, setting the portrait down with a finality that broke her heart. The living are trouble enough without chasing phantoms. He picked up a letter from his desk, his expression hardening into the grim mask she had seen at the funeral. "Tell Mrs. Thorne I will be out for the rest of the day. Business at the shipyard?" He stood and left without another glance. The moment was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the silent room. The shipyard! Isabella had mentioned the shipyard and its troubling figures. It was the center of it all. As she turned to leave, her eyes fell on the letter he had been reading. It was left out, careless in his distraction. It was written in the same cipher as Isabella's letters. A cold dread washed over her. He wasn't just aware of the conspiracy. He was an active participant. The grief, the anguish, it had all been a magnificent performance. The hope she had felt curdled into a sickening despair. Blindly, she reached for the letter, her fingers numb. She had to know. She had to see the treason in his own hand. But as her fingers brushed the paper, a floorboard creaked behind her. "Looking for something, my dear?" Ilara spun around. Isabella stood in the doorway, a small, deadly smile on her lips. In her hand, she held a delicate emerald green thread, pinched between her thumb and forefinger. "I found this," Isabella said, her voice a silken threat. "Caught on the balustrade just outside my room last night. After a certain mysterious dancer so captivated my fiancé, Ilara's blood ran cold. She said nothing, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. Isabella glided into the room, closing the door softly behind her. I must admit I was puzzled. A maid with a masquerade gown? A French girl who moves with the grace of a lady? It was a fascinating riddle. She stopped in front of Ilara, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. But then I remembered. My dear departed friend Ilara. She spoke flawless French, and she had a particular fondness for emerald green. She knew. "You're surprisingly difficult to kill, Ilara," Isabella said conversationally, picking up the letter from the desk. "First the carriage accident that only took your boring old husband. Then the poison that merely gave you a convenient illness. I'd begun to think you were protected by divine intervention. But it seems you're just a common fraud." The words landed like physical blows. The carriage accident that killed Marcus. Her own sudden illness. They hadn't been tragedies. They had been attempts. Murder attempts. And Alistair? He had been there through all of it. Comforting her. Supporting her. Does he know? Ilara asked, her voice a raw scrape. Does Alistair know you tried to kill me? Isabella's laugh was a beautiful, chilling sound. Alistair? Poor, stupid, honorable Alistair. He has no idea. He believes you died of a broken heart, just as he believes I am a vulnerable widow he must protect. Her smile widened. He's so very good at believing what he's told. It's his greatest weakness. She leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. He also believes that I possess certain letters that prove his beloved brother was the one who sold secrets to the enemy, not mine. A scandal that would destroy his family's name forever. He'll do anything to keep that secret buried, even marry a woman he despises, even let the world believe he is a traitor. The full, horrifying picture snapped into focus. Alistair wasn't the villain. He was the victim. He was protecting his family's name from Isabella's blackmail, playing the part of the conspirator to prevent a worse scandal, all while believing the woman he truly loved was dead. And Ilara had walked right into the viper's nest. He'll never believe you, Isabella said, correctly reading the resolve hardening on Ilara's face. Why would he? A woman who faked her own death, who spied on him, who lied to him at every turn. You're a ghost, Ilara, and ghosts have no voice. She gestured to the door with the hand that held the emerald thread. Get out. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Disappear again, or I will make sure the next death you fake becomes very, very real. Isabella swept from the room, leaving Ilara standing alone, shattered. She had the truth. But it was a truth that was utterly useless. Isabella was right. Who would believe her? She had no proof, only the word of a known liar and spy against that of a respected peer. She looked at the door, then at the ledger and letters she had stolen from Isabella's room, hidden now under her bed. Isabella had the power of blackmail, but Ilara had something else. She had the actual evidence of treason, and she had a choice. To run as she always had, or to finally truly fight for the man she loved. The British Foreign Office was a fortress of solemnity and secrets. In a private antechamber, a meeting of utmost importance was underway. Diplomats from 3 nations were finalizing the terms of the trade alliance that would reshape the balance of power in Europe. Lord Alistair Finch was among them, his face a polite, unreadable mask. Isabella Thorne sat demurely in a corner, the picture of supportive womanhood, but her eyes missed nothing. She was there to ensure her investment paid off, to witness the moment Alistair, under her direction, would raise a last-minute objection so damaging it would scuttle the entire deal. She did not see the woman dressed in the plain, dark dress of a clerk's assistant who slipped into the room and began quietly refilling water glasses. She did not see the familiar sea-green eyes that glanced up from under a simple cap as she poured water into Alistair's glass. But Alistair did. He froze, his hand tightening around his pen. His eyes locked onto the woman's hands, the way she held the pitcher, the faint, familiar scent of jasmine cutting through the stuffy air. His breath hitched. It was impossible. A hallucination born of stress and grief. The clerk moved away, but as she did, her fingers brushed against his sleeve. Something small and hard was pressed into his hand. The meeting droned on. Under the table, Alistair slowly unclenched his fist. In his palm lay a single heavy signet ring. His signet ring. The one he kept in a box on his dresser. The one he had given to Ilara years ago for safekeeping during a riding lesson, and she had never returned. Teasing that she'd keep it as collateral for a dance he owed her. His heart stopped. Ilara! His head snapped up, his eyes frantically scanning the room. He saw the clerk's back just as she was leaving, but not before she glanced over her shoulder and gave him a look that was both an apology and a command. Trust me. Isabella caught his eye and gave a slight, imperious nod. It was time. Time to destroy his honor and his country's future to save his family's past. The head diplomat turned to him. Lord Finch? You wish to address the assembly on the matter of maritime tariffs? Alistair stood. The room fell silent. He could feel Isabella's triumphant gaze on him. He looked down at the ring in his hand, a tangible piece of the woman he thought he'd lost forever, a woman who was here now throwing him a lifeline. He took a deep breath. Thank you, sir. I do have something to add. He paused, his voice firming with a newfound resolve. It concerns not the tariffs, but the integrity of this entire proceeding. Isabella's smile was victorious. It has come to my attention, Alistair continued, his voice ringing clear in the hushed room, that one among us is not here as a friend to this alliance, but as a saboteur. A nervous murmur rippled through the diplomats. Isabella's smile faltered, confusion clouding her features. At that moment, the doors to the antechamber swung open. 2 stern-looking men from the Home Office entered, followed by the clerk, who now stood straight and tall, her cap removed, her sea-green eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen in years. Gentlemen, Ilara said, her voice clear and commanding, devoid of any French accent or subservience. It was the voice of Lady Ilara Vance, a woman born to lead. The saboteur is Mrs. Isabella Thorne, and I have the evidence right here. She held up the slim ledger and the packet of letters. Isabella shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury and panic. This is an outrage. She is an imposter, a madwoman. She is supposed to be dead. A fact you are intimately familiar with, madam, Ilara countered coolly. her gaze never leaving Isabella's. "As you are familiar with the poison you administered, and the carriage axle you sawed nearly through." She turned to the diplomats. Her motives are not political but financial. "She has been selling our secrets to fund her own empire, and she has been blackmailing Lord Finch to ensure his cooperation by threatening to reveal fabricated evidence about his family." "Lies!" Isabella shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Alistair. "He is the traitor! I have proof!" "Letters from his brother, letters you forged," Alistair interjected, his voice cold as steel. The ring was a solid weight in his hand, an anchor of truth. "I have spent these last months playing your game, Isabella, gathering my own evidence of your forgeries and your treason, waiting for the right moment. I believed you had taken the one good thing left in my life." His eyes found Ilara's, and the raw emotion in them was answer enough. "It seems I was wrong." The Home Office officials moved forward, taking the evidence from Ilara and closing in on Isabella. Her beautiful face contorted in rage and defeat as they took her arms. "You fool!" She spat at Alistair as she was led away. "You sentimental fool. She will be the death of you." The door closed behind her, leaving a stunned silence in the room. Alistair didn't look at the diplomats. He only had eyes for the woman standing by the door, alive and breathing and more magnificent than any ghost. He took a step toward her, then another, the gulf between them feeling wider than any ocean. "Ilara?" he whispered, the name a prayer on his lips. Tears welled in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Alistair, for the lies, for the deception. I thought I was protecting myself. I thought you were—" He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and without a word he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning off its axis for far too long. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in, and she could feel the violent tremor that ran through him. "You're alive!" he choked out, his voice muffled against her neck. "My God, you're alive!" In that moment, surrounded by the confused diplomats and the remnants of a shattered conspiracy, the past fell away. There was no blackmail, no treason, no ghostly masquerades. There was only this, the profound, shaking relief of a love that had cheated death itself. The scandal, of course, was immense, but it was a scandal that clung to Isabella Thorne, not to them. The forged letters she had used to blackmail Alistair were exposed, and his brother's name was publicly cleared. The Home Office, grateful for the uncovering of a dangerous mole, was more than happy to let the unusual circumstances of Ilara's resurrection remain a classified secret. To the world, Lady Ilara Vance had retired to the country for her health during a time of great personal tragedy, and had now returned. They stood on the terrace of his country estate. Weeks later, watching the sun set over the rolling green hills. The air was warm, scented with roses and fresh-cut grass. The silence between them was no longer filled with ghosts and secrets, but with a quiet, healing peace. Ilara had told him everything. The fear that had driven her to fake her death, the mission that had drawn her back, the devastating moment she found the special license and believed the worst of him. "I never loved her," Alistair said, his voice soft. He stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "The license, it was a ruse, a way to keep her close, to make her believe she had won while I gathered evidence. The thought of marrying her made my skin crawl. But the thought of my brother being remembered as a traitor—" He trailed off, and she leaned back into his solid strength. "I know," she said. "I understand duty. It ruled my life for so long. Duty to my family, to my country, to my cover stories." She turned in his arms to face him. "But I am done with duty, Alistair. I want a life ruled by choice. My choice!" He looked down at her, the setting sun painting her face in tones of gold and rose. She was real. She was here. The constant, aching void in his chest that had been there since her funeral was finally filled. "And what is your choice, Ilara?" he asked, his heart in his throat. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumb stroking the line of his jaw. "I choose you," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I should have chosen you years ago before fear and circumstance and stupid, noble ideas of what was proper got in the way. I love you, Alistair Finch. I think I have always loved you. The words were a balm, a blessing, the only truth that had ever mattered. He lowered his forehead to hers, closing his eyes as a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over him. The world believes you are still in mourning, he murmured, a smile finally touching his lips. It would be a terrible scandal if you were to marry so soon. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face, the same smile he had fallen in love with across a crowded ballroom a lifetime ago. Then let's cause a scandal, she said. I've already been dead. A little gossip holds no fear for me. He laughed then, a real, full-bodied laugh that felt like coming home. He kissed her, not with the desperate hunger of their reunion, but with a sweet, deep promise of forever. They were married a month later in a small, sun-drenched chapel on his estate. There was no special license obtained under duress, no political maneuvering, no audience of gossiping peers. There were only a few close friends who knew the truth, the vicar and the profound, quiet certainty that they had been given a second chance few people ever received. As they walked back down the aisle, husband and wife, Alara squeezed his arm. "No more ghosts," she whispered. He covered her hand with his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he had placed there. "No," he agreed, his voice full of a peace he had never thought he'd know. "No more ghosts. Only us." Lady Alara Vance, the woman who had been a wife, a widow, a spy, and a ghost, had finally found her true role, herself, and she was finally completely home.